everybody, welcome. This is Classical Stuff You Should Know. This is a podcast about the classical world, old literature, that sort of thing. We talk about philosophy, sometimes art, sometimes the economy, surprisingly enough. Talk about a lot of things. My name is AJ Hannenberg. I'm joined by Thomas Magby.
Hello.
And Graham Donaldson.
Hi.
We're back.
And I have only two questions for the both of you.
Great.
Question number one is, am I the only one who doesn't always shower before coming to record?
Well,
You really want us to talk about this?
I mean, so here's what, I know how far I'm going to sit from you guys. I know you probably won't smell me. Usually I'm putting together an episode and don't always have time. I'm just wondering if that's just me or if that's...
I think none of us have showered today, actually. It's probably what's true.
I have not showered.
Yeah, I have not showered today either. So, cool.
Great. Cleared that up.
Three stinky boys. Yeah, good.
Question number two is, right before we come into an intro, we always ask what the episode's going to be about so we can say something clever.
Yes.
Thomas asked Graham, and then Graham said a lot of words. And my question is, what was all of that about? You said a lot of words that all seem to mush together. I don't...
We're talking about classical stuff. Stuff.
You should know.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's actually, I was reflecting on
Wow.
the fact that our name is pretty, like, classical stuff you should know. It's, like, pretty forceful. Pretty direct.
Like,
Yeah.
you should
You
know
should-
this.
You should have known this.
It's like,
morons.
it's kind of embarrassing you
Yeah.
don't know this.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So that we should. So really, instead of our goofy intros that we still haven't nailed, we should open it with like, "What up, idiots?
Yeah,
Here's some
that's
stuff
right.
that you should already know."
Cool. So what are we talking about today?
I don't know.
Can you give the same summary you gave me, and maybe the audience will
We're
understand?
talking. Well, I don't want to give it away.
Okay.
So, we haven't recorded in a while. One of the reasons we haven't recorded was I went on a vacation over
And that's the
Thanksgiving.
only reason.
It's the only
all-
reason.
it's all
We
reason.
had nothing
That's
to do
right.
with AJ.
That's right.
And I went to Rome. I've never been to Rome before. And we did the tour of the Vatican. We paid the extra money to be there before everybody else shows up and have the breakfast in the Vatican, which was really fun. And when we were going to go on the tour, the tour guide said, "Oh, here's what we're going to be doing on the tour." And he didn't mention the Raphael rooms, and we were kind of bummed. And so I was like, "All right, well, that's kind of too bad." Maybe because Rome's going under, they're doing all the they're cleaning it for the Jubilee next year. Anyway, my wife raises her hand and says, "Will we see the Raphael rooms?" And our tour guide says, "No, we're not going to see them. I'll show you where they are at the end of the Sistine Chapel if you want to circle back and go yourself." And we're like, "Okay, that's fine." Anyway, we go to breakfast, we come back.
Hold on, I just realized something.
Yeah.
So last night when we were talking about your trip, and you guys talked about how the Pietà was all like, it's just been cleaned. It was
Yeah,
under. I said, well, that's really smart of you to go right after the Olympics, because I know that in Paris they cleaned everything in that city.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess my whole Europe trip blended together,
Yeah.
and for some reason I thought the Pietà was in Paris. So I said something
It's not.
really dumb
You
to your
did.
wife.
And Amanda and I realized it, but didn't call you out on it in the moment. So
I really appreciate that.
right.
Amanda,
okay.
I love you. I'm sorry, I'm done.
It's
I'm
all
dumb.
right. Yeah, I was like, the Roman Olympics.
I just realized that. So yeah.
78 or something. So.
Yep. Whoops.
Anyway.
Hard whoops.
That's fine.
I'm glad you realized that here. This
Yeah, I
this
just
is really
realized
good.
it just
Yeah.
now.
So anyway, we come back from breakfast, and the tour guide's like, "Hey, would you guys be cool if we extended the tour by half an hour and go to the Raphael rooms?" And we're like, yes.
Yes.
Anyway, so we got to go to the Raphael rooms. And I got to see the School of Athens. Now, and this is what spawned this idea for the podcast. So in the School of Athens, for those
Which is a
of you-
painting you can see on our website, right?
which is a
Yes.
painting you can see on the website, which is something you can Google right now. If you're driving, you can imagine it.
Okay.
Or if you're driving a Tesla, you can Google it. Because your car is driving for you.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying. In it, so the School of Athens, that famous picture of Raphael in the Vatican of all of the famous sort of ancient pagan philosophers and mathematicians doing their thing. You got one dude chilling on the steps. You got math going on. You've got, if you look at the far right corner, there's this dude looking at you, and that's Raphael. But right in the middle of it, you've got Plato and Aristotle. And Plato is the older guy on the left, and Aristotle is in his famous blue robe on the right. And if you look at that, are you looking at it right now?
I'm
Maybe?
pulling it up,
And
yep.
so if you pull it up, so they're both gesturing.
Right.
And so Megby, can you describe the gestures?
Plato points up and Aristotle points down.
That's right. Plato is pointing up to the sky, and Aristotle's almost like pointing down, but it's almost like Aristotle's giving a whoa, 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 buddy. He's kind of like
Looks like he's dribbling a basketball.
Exactly. Looks like he's dribbling a basketball. And this is sort of visually symbolic of their methodology. And we're going to talk today about sort of the Platonic idea of how you understand something and why Plato is pointing up, and the Aristotelian idea of how you know something and why Aristotle is pointing down. Now, they're not opposites nor are they in conflict. And in a weird way, like often Plato and Aristotle come to the same conclusions about topics, but they're using very different methodology. And I kind of want to
Like me and you.
like me and you. And
I'm right, and you have to be convinced.
and I have to be convinced. And I want to talk about that methodology and like maybe some of the ways that if you just use one over the other, how it can go wrong. And just sort of like how you think about these two different ways of knowing something. So let's talk a little bit about Plato. So if I was going to give like a little summary statement of the Platonic view and the Aristotelian view, Plato is somebody who is all about like the theoretical ideas, the world of ideas, up in the sky. He's pointing upwards.
He wants to know the essence of things.
He wants to know the essence of things. If you've listened to our episodes that we've ever done on Plato, AJ is going to do another one after this. It is done in dialogues, these Socratic dialogues where Socrates is asking basically strip away questions, or he's asking questions to try to get to the essence of something. And we're going to look at the analogy of the allegory of Plato's cave today to sort of give the example of like, this is what the philosopher man should do. So Plato's all about the world of the ideas up in the heavens. He's pointing up. Aristotle his methodology is more about coming to conclusions based on the world of observable experience. So he's pointing down and he's talking about experience and he's talking about that which can be observed. So it's like inductive reasoning versus deductive reasoning. It's theory versus experience. And so these are the two sort of methodologies. And anyway, so let's look at Plato first. So I'm going to read a little bit of Plato's cave, and you'll get a sort of sense as to what Plato thinks, how we understand something. So for you keeping score at home, we're reading a little bit of Plato's allegory of Plato's cave, which is found in Republic Book 7, and we're also going to be looking at the first chapter of Aristotle's Metaphysics. And the reason why we're sort of reading this is I kind of want to show less the conclusions and more the method, because the method is interesting. Anyway, so let's look at it. All right, so let me read some Republic Book 7. So the Republic is a dialogue between Socrates and a bunch of people, and they're trying to understand what justice is. And the way to understand justice is they build a theoretical city. They just sort of like already there's that idea that they are, to understand the nature of something, let's imagine an ideal. They're literally just sitting around in the living room using their imagination to come up with the form of justice.
The perfect city.
The perfect city. And in the perfect city, they can understand what the nature of justice is. So already right there, you've kind of got that Greek, Western, we can come to conclusions purely based on visualizing in our minds as opposed to like the real world. Okay, so here we go. This is what, and when they're talking about education and they're talking about how you learn something, Plato, through the character of Socrates, gives this analogy. Next, I said, compare the effect of education and of the lack of it on our nature to an experience like this. Imagine human beings living in an underground cave-like dwelling with an entrance a long way up, which is both open to the light and as wide as the cave itself. They've been there since childhood, fixed in the same place, with their necks and legs fettered, able to see only in front of them because the bonds prevent them from turning their heads around. Light is provided by a fire burning above and behind them. Also below them, but on higher ground, there is a path stretching between them and the fire. Imagine that along this path a low wall has been built, like the screen in front of puppeteers above which they show their puppets. And Glaucon says, I'm imagining it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
And then he goes on, they imagine there are people along the wall carrying all sort of artifacts that project statues of people and other animals made out of stone, wood, and every material. Some of them are talking and some of them are silent. And then they have to sort of look at these shadows. And then it says they can't sort of escape. They refer to this as a prison. And he says, and if the prisoners could talk to one another, do you think they'd suppose that the names they used apply to the things they are seeing passing before them? Well, of course. And what if their person also had an echo from the wall facing them? Do you think they'd believe that the shadows passing in front of them were talking whenever one of the carriers passed along the wall? The little party goer said, yeah, of course. Then the prisoners would in every way believe that the truth is nothing other than the shadows of those artifacts. Okay, so right there, Plato is giving kind of like an analogy of reality. Can one of you guys kind of like give like a summary, what the summary of his analogy of reality?
The stuff we see in our everyday life is only the shadow of the real thing. It's
That's
not.
right.
It's all kind of illusory and not really the actual reality.
Yep.
That's right. So when you see a dog, or when you see a tree, or when you hear something, and when we talk about it and our experience, it is illusionary to, if that's a word. It's an illusion of the reality.
Or maybe at least a derivative.
Yeah, that's probably a better word.
Yeah.
It's a derivative
It's not
of the
full
reality.
illusory. It's really there. It's
Yeah.
just you're not seeing the reality itself. You're seeing something derived from the reality itself. You're
So
not
you're-
seeing a like full dogness. You're seeing
The shadow of a dog.
individual account of the dog, which is deficient in some way.
That's right. So it's deficient in some way, and when you talk about it, you are only able to talk about what you experience, and that experience itself is going to be derivative and deficient.
Yep.
Of course. Okay. And then he says, imagine that somebody kind of breaks out of their chains and fetters and climbs up. Here's a little phrase. Consider then what being released from their bonds and cured of their ignorance would naturally be like. Remember, he's describing this as education. Education is like this. If something like this came to pass, when one of them was freed and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look up towards the light, he'd be pained and dazzled and unable to see things whose shadows he'd seen before. What do you think he'd say if we told him that what he'd seen before was inconsequential, but that now, because he is a bit closer to the things that are and is turned towards things that are no more, he sees more correctly? Or to put it another way, if we pointed to each of the things passing by, asked him what each of them is, and compelled him to answer, don't you think he'd be at a loss? And that he believed that the things he saw earlier were truer than the ones he was now being shown? Much truer. And if someone compelled him to look at the light itself, wouldn't his eyes hurt, and wouldn't he turn away and flee towards the things he'd able to see, believing that they were really clearer than the ones he's being shown? Of course. So you get the prisoner breaks out of his little prison, and when he begins to go to the thing itself, he kind of naturally rebels against it because it's too bright, it's too dazzling, it's kind of scary.
It's not the same as what he saw before.
Not the same as what he thought before, and he would want to go back to what was familiar. Anyway, and then, but if he perseveres and he goes up, he's going to see, it's going to take him a while, and he's going to have to like observe what's real only at night because the sun is too bright. But then as he adjusts to it, he'll be able to observe the true things. And when he goes back to the cave to try to tell everybody what's real and what's true about, everyone's going to make fun of him and ridicule him. And Plato even says, and kill him, which is kind of strange. Whereas everybody in the cave, they would give each other honors, praises, and prizes for the one who is sharpest at identifying the shadows as they passed by, and who best remembered what usually came earlier, which later, and which simultaneously, blah, 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 blah. So all the people in the cave that are chained are like giving each other Nobel Prizes for how well they are at identifying and understanding the shadows. Whereas the dude that broke out and sees reality for what it is comes back and is ridiculed and mocked. And then here's sort of the end of this little section that I want to read. Because here's when Plato sort of tips his hand in this little parable, and, he sort of reveals what he's talking about. This whole image, Glaucon, must be fitted together with what we said before. The visible realm should be likened to the prison dwelling, and the light of the fire inside it to the power of the sun. And if you interpret the upward journey and the study of things above as the upward journey of the soul to the intelligible realm, you'll grasp what I hope to convey, since that is what you wanted to hear about. Whether it's true or not, only the God knows. But this is how I see it. In the knowable realm, the form of the good is the last thing to be seen, and it is reached only with difficulty. Once one has seen it, however, one must conclude that it is the cause of all that is correct and beautiful in anything, that it produces both light and its source in the visible realm, and that in the intelligible realm it controls and provides truth and understanding. so that anyone who is to act sensibly in private or public must see it. Come then, share with me this thought also. It isn't surprising that the ones who get to this point are unwilling to occupy themselves with human affairs, and that their souls are always pressing upwards, eager to spend their time above. For, after all, this is surely what we'd expect, if indeed things fit the image I described before. So Plato gives this sort of idea that the world that we live in is the shadow world, and that there are people who are pressing upwards into the study of like the divine things or the realm of ideas. And this is why Plato was pointing up, because he says it's kind of obvious that for him that he lionizes this idea. This is the goal of the good enlightened man, is to try to like almost disembody, well, if you sort of take that at its word, almost disembody himself from the shadow world and try to dwell in the
real world?
The real world, or the world of the good, or the world of the beautiful. It's all, I mean, there's a reason why Platonism, as it went on, almost took on like a quasi-mystical religious enlightenment bent.
Sure.
That like have we ever talked about Gnostics in the podcast?
I'm sure it's
How would you like describe Gnosticism?
It's like this belief that there's like secret knowledge that certain people get access to, and that whatever group is offering it is like they are the one source of truth, right? So that's kind of like more broadly.
And typically body evil, spirit good.
Yes, body, yeah. That there's sort of secret knowledge.
The secret knowledge was usually that.
That like there's like a realm above and beyond the physical realm that is good and the body is bad. And so we see this even play out today with any kind of like sort of new agey stuff, or even like startup bros that are taking mushrooms in the Amazon to try to, what's that like famous drug that people are taking?
Ayahuasca?
Yeah. Because there's that idea that like, oh, if we can sort of ascend to some sort of higher plane,
we'll please our investors.
We'll please, yes, the investing gods will be pleased. That we will sort of attribute some sort of secret knowledge, and then we can like, I don't know, like crush our KPIs or something.
It sounds like a religion, though.
It is
the Platonism stuff you're talking about.
Yeah.
So.
And what's a KPI? I mean, I already know, obviously.
A key performance indicator. It's like business
speak. Yeah.
Speak.
I mean, I knew. I just wanted to make sure that you told the audience.
Yeah,
For the listeners.
That's very accommodating. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so Plato's got this idea that like human life and philosophical inquiry is to be done in the realm of the idea. It is to be sort of done above the common bound. And yeah, it almost takes on this quasi sort of like enlightenment spiritual aspect to it. That the physical world, he doesn't go so far as to say that the physical world is evil, but even in the analogy, there's sort of disdain for the people and almost mockery for the people who are staying in the cave. And like the real ones are the ones that can kind of escape it. Now, this is the passage that launched 1,000 insufferable like philosophy undergrads.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Like, don't you hate this person? Like, as it's like, no,
You're in the
I'm real.
Matrix,
Yeah,
Magby.
that's right.
The funny thing is how much this is playing into my next episode.
Oh, good.
Oh, so much.
That's good.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, yeah, it is kind of this insufferable thing, because you have lots of people that are like, I've reached, I live in the world of ideas. I don't live in the common realm.
I knew a philosophy major like that in college. He was like,
for sure, they're all like that.
Nietzsche stuff. I could have thought of all that. And we're like, but you didn't.
Yeah, you didn't.
Like,
That's right.
But so I think it's right to say that there is a certain kind of arrogance with this, and but this is the realm of this sort of.
Are you gonna tell me it's deserved? Like
No, but I think there's where I'm going with this podcast. We'll look at metaphysics in a second. Is I'm trying to figure out like when is that kind of mode of thinking necessary in human affairs? Having a philosophy about something, having an idea about saying about trying to find the ideal of something versus its opposite, which is going to be what Aristotle talks about, which is coming to conclusions based on experience. And so let's look at metaphysics. So we've kind of covered Plato. Plato is the things that you can experience in this life are derivative, illusionary, derivative at best, maybe even manipulative at worst, that by looking at them, you're not getting the real thing. And if you turn into somebody that really pats yourself on the back for like categorizing the shadows. That's almost a laughable thing.
Right.
That passage where he says, and if there had been any honors, praises, or prizes among them for the ones who was the sharpest at identifying the shadows as they passed by, and who best remembered what usually came earlier, which later, and which simultaneously. So it's like, oh, this person predicted that the dog shadow preceded the cat shadow on the little like carousel of whatever. And yay! And Aristotle and Plato sort of making fun of him. Okay, so keep that sort of. I'm also not doing a good enough job being neutral. Like I'm sort of making fun of it a little bit. I do think being a first principles kind of person is important. Like not having to experience something, but thinking through it. Anyway, I'm putting the cart above.
I'm probably seeking to like break out of like there's a way things are in your current year, your current city, whatever, and like trying to find true things beyond that.
That's
There's
right.
probably, like a lot.
So you don't
that's
need
really
to be
good
completely relied on just your own personal experience. That you can sit in a room and build a city in your mind and come to real conclusions about the world.
And learn
You
things.
And
That's
learn
right.
things.
Yeah,
You
that's
can.
right. Yeah.
And that's a really important thing. Okay, so that's why Plato's pointing up.
Okay.
Here's why Aristotle is pointing down. So we're looking at the metaphysic. Now, I have this this giant book I'm holding is the basic works of Aristotle.
Great.
Just the basic
Just
works?
the basic works.
Yeah.
But
Doesn't
even-
have his sonnets?
What Aristotle tries to do,
good.
what Aristotle tries to do, you know what? I want a bust of Aristotle. I've decided that, this is probably not a surprise, but I'm a huge Aristotle fanboy. If you just look at the, are you looking up how much it costs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He just found your Christmas gift, obviously.
Duh.
If you kind of look at the books that Aristotle writes, Aristotle is trying to create the basically the category of everything that can be known and observed. So Aristotle comes up with conclusions about the universe through observing the particular and coming to the generalization. Whereas Plato kind of wants to leapfrog the particular and just go to the generalization in his mind. If you just, anyway, let me just read. I was thinking of maybe reading the entire table of contents just so you can get a sense of what Aristotle's books are. Here we go. So he talks about like what actually is a category, how can you interpret something, the prior analytics, the posterior analytics, what are the topics, how do you refute? Then he has a book on physics, a book on the heavens, a book on generation and corruption, a book on the soul, a book on memory, a book on dreams, a book on prophesying, which is interesting, a book on animals, on parts of animals, the generation of animals, the metaphysics, the ethics, the politics, the rhetoric, the poetics.
Yeah.
So like Aristotle is he is writing basically notes on everything that you can observe in the world. And this is why Aristotle is somebody who is depicted pointing down. Plato can be perfectly happy sitting alone in a room thinking about things, whereas Aristotle is the one that like wants to explore the entirety of the world. So let me just read to you a little bit of chapter 1 of the Metaphysics, and you can get a sense of his methodology. All men by nature desire to know. Great
Just
first-
off the bat.
Great
right,
first
yeah,
sentence.
That's great.
And how would Aristotle have come to this conclusion? Well, he's a man. He observes men. He
he's a
sees it.
Yep.
An indication of this is the delight we take in our senses, for even apart from their usefulness, they are loved for themselves. And above all others, the sense of sight. For not only with a view to action, but even when we are not going to do anything, we prefer seeing, one might say, to everything else. The reason is that this, most of all the senses, makes us know and brings to light many differences between things. So already at the beginning of Aristotle's book about knowing, he praises eyes. Like our eye, he's like, isn't it a great thing to be able to see? So Aristotle, the observer. I'm not saying that Plato could be blind, but Plato does, when Plato writes about how we come to know, he starts off by having men in a dark cave not seeing properly.
Yep.
And Aristotle talks about how we innately love our eyes, and we almost see viewing as an good in and of itself, even though it is in a service of a greater good, which is knowing.
So I'm not trying to spoil next week's episode, but that is literally the opposite of what Plato says.
Yeah.
He has Socrates saying he is desirous of death, and one of the things he says is like our senses lead us astray. We are never seeing what's actually real, and so trying to get away from our senses into the essence of things and not trust the silly things our senses are telling us. That's the real way towards wisdom, which is literally the opposite of like.
Crazy.
So Aristotle saying our eyes are such great things because through them we get knowledge is almost a direct contradiction of what Plato said.
I don't know if we want to go as far as to say that this can be woven into personalities, but it's probably a good thing for everybody in their own life to investigate in what way am I more on the Platonic side of things in thinking that I don't trust my senses, I trust my logical or my own sort of reason, my own logic, my first principles, my coming to conclusions in my head, versus are you more the person that says, I want to sort of like experience lots of things and be able to come to conclusions based on getting reports from other people and getting advice and or getting statistics on something. We'll get to that. That's kind of where I want to go with this. But let's sort of lay some groundwork with Aristotle first.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
We're so back.
I shouldn't have had fuzzy water.
Bubbly water. How dare you?
So then he's all right. He says animals are born with the nature of sensation, but humans are different. Let's see, where do I want to read? By nature, animals are born with the faculty of sensation, and from sensation, memory is produced in some of them, though not in others. And therefore, the former are more intelligent and apt at learning than those which cannot remember. Those which are incapable of hearing sounds are intelligent, though they cannot be taught. Example, the bee, and any other race of animals that may be like it. And those which, besides memory, have the sense of hearing can be taught. So if you have the capacity to remember stuff, you're in a better spot than if you can't. And if you can't hear, you're not going to be able to learn like bee. Apparently, bees can't hear. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
The animals other than man live by appearance and memories and have but little of connected experience. But the human race lives also by art and reasonings. Now, this is interesting. Now, from memory, experience is produced in men. For the several memories of the same thing produced finally the capacity for a single experience. And experience seems pretty much like science and art. But really, science and art comes to men through experience. For experience made art, as Paulus says, but inexperience, luck. Now, art arises when, from many notions gained by experience, one universal judgment about a class of objects is produced. So that's probably the big thing. Yeah. When you have many experience about something, and you come to what he called the general universal judgment about a class of objects, you have now understood the art of something. And I think he's getting at the same thing as like when Plato wants to see the form, essence. The essence, the real thing. Aristotle says you can come to that by seeing by having a bunch of different experiences, having them in your memory, coming to a generalized conclusion, and now you have the art of something. And he says when you've gathered a bunch of different arts, he says that is wisdom. That's where he's going with this. Okay.
Man, I love Aristotle.
Yeah, Aristotle's awesome.
He just makes so much sense. Like, it feels like Plato is sort of searching, like he's the guy who's just escaped the cave and is kind of dazzled. And then Aristotle's like, here's what you're actually seeing there, bud.
Now, for to have a judgment that when Callias was ill of this disease, this did him good, and similarly in the case of Socrates and in many individual cases, is a matter of experience. So you're like, hey, Callias had a stuffy nose and I shoved a root vegetable up there and he was fine. Uh-huh. And I did the same thing with Socrates. But to judge that it has done good to all persons of a certain constitution, marked off in one class when they were ill of this disease, example, to phlegmatic or bilious people when burning with fever, this is a matter of art. So it's experience to say, I rubbed a bunch of dirt on Magby's face when he was sick and he got better. Yep. And it's an art to say, if I rub this specific kind of dirt on people with this specific kind of malady, that is the art.
Well, and it's not just one kind of person, he's like, it actually works with all sorts of people. Like, so he's done it twice. He's like, it's pretty decent. And then he's like, okay, it works if you're big, if you're small, if you're tired, if you're old, if you're young.
Now, okay, then he's going to come. But he is going to come down a little bit on the pure theoretical person, and the theoretical person is like the Plato person. With a view to action, experience seems in no respect inferior to art, and men of experience succeed even better than those who have theory without experience. The reason is that experience is knowledge of individuals, art of universals, and actions and productions are all connected with the individual. 4. The physician does not cure man except in an incidental way, but Callias or Socrates or some other called by some such individual name who happens to be a man. If then a man has the theory without the experience and recognizes the universal, but does not know the individual included in this, he will often fail to cure, for it is the individual that has to be cured. So Aristotle seems to be saying, if you could jump to the spiritual realm and get out of the cave and learn medicine, you could have the form of medicine, and you came back, you probably wouldn't be all that good at curing men because you would have lacked the experience, and you wouldn't have sort of the art that presumably gets built up over time. Does that make sense? Am I reading that right?
I'm not sure I agree with it, because I'm trying to think of like, who do I want to be my doctor? Like, do I want Plato or Aristotle? And I think I want Plato, right? Like, if you get to the theoretical realm and you find the cure to whatever disease I have, I'd rather that than like Aristotle goes. Your example of the dirt, I think, is like spot on, right? Like he knows a guy who got cured by dirt, so he's gonna like try and apply that again.
But would you want the surgeon that right before you're going under says, I've never done this before, but I've read a lot of books?
I was just going to say that.
I think I do. The one who's read books instead of like,
I don't know, man.
Because even Aristotle hasn't probably gone to school. I don't know. Like, there's going to be problem. I'm sure we can get to extremes on either one of them. But the person who has studied this and knows like this is in general where like how this works, as opposed to I did this a couple times and now I hope you're similar to the people I've known.
I think we're underselling what art is, like a guy who's done it a couple times.
Yep.
Like, for example, if I'm going to send my kid into a classroom and there's two different teachers and one has just come out of college, they just did extensive studying, they have a PhD in like teaching sciences, they know all of the theory, and then there's a guy who's been teaching for 20 years, I'm going to send my kid to the one who's been teaching for 20 years because he actually knows how to control a classroom, because all of the theory, like I can read a whole bunch of theory about how to control a classroom, but I know like personally, like when I like my experience in controlling kids and developing relationships with them is invaluable. Like over the 15 years, I figured out how to do that right. But walking in, even if I had like studied it, I wouldn't have known what I was doing. And so maybe we're talking about
your example though is taking like one is much less has spent much less time on it than the other, right? One has spent a couple years learning and the other has spent 20 years in experience. So you need a more comparable comparison between those two, of one who has thought about and gotten to, the person who is well-read in the classical works that they are teaching, as opposed to the one who has taught a few classes. Like that, we need to get more similar comparisons between the two. I hear you.
But I think what Aristotle's saying about the art is that you have to have a massive breadth of experience to develop the art. And so it wouldn't be just like a doctor who's done it a couple times. It's a guy who's been in the field for 20 years and has seen the dirt applied 1,000 times. And some other guy's like, that's not the essence of tea. But he's like, yes, but this is the thing that works.
He does say, and later in this, Aristotle says that men of experience can't teach. He says only the artist can teach. So I think Plato, when he describes the person who's broken into the realm of ideas, and Aristotle, when he describes the artist, I think they're talking about the same thing. That the artist is the person that knows the idea of the essence of something, and Plato is talking about the person who knows the essence of something. But Plato seems to denigrate the experience.
Right. How you got there.
And Aristotle seems to say that the experience is the necessary function that you need to do in order to become the artist. Yeah. So I don't think you can become an art. I think Aristotle would say, I don't think you can become an artist any other way.
You can't just leap to the essence like Plato wants you to. Aristotle says you have to get there through experience.
And yes, now the thing is, I think Plato does believe that you can leap and get to the essence, and that's what he has Socrates doing, the dialectic, the asking of questions. And we've had this debate on the podcast before of, can you come to anything true by talking about what everything isn't? But if you can like strip away what something isn't, can you get to what is? Aristotle, my understanding of Aristotle is that Aristotle says, no, you can't. You actually have to go and do a bunch of experience and then come up with those general categories and become the artist. So I want to see if there's anything else I wanted to read here. But yet we think that knowledge and understanding belong to art rather than to experience, and we suppose artists to be wiser than men of experience. It is a sign of the man who knows and of the man who does not know that the former can teach, and therefore we think art more truly knowledge than experiences. For the artist can teach, and men of mere experience cannot. They can know that fire is hot, but not why fire is hot. So the way I think about it is that I'm trying to think of like maybe examples that drive this home. And if this is too repetitive for people who've listened to this podcast for a long time, I apologize. There's a scene in Romeo and Juliet where Friar Lawrence and Romeo are arguing, and Romeo is lamenting the fact that he's been banished from Verona, and he's going to leave because he's killed Tybalt, and he's been banished, and he's not going to see Juliet anymore. And Friar Lawrence is trying to reason with him, and Friar Lawrence is clearly correct in reasoning with him that, like, dude, it's okay. Go to Mantua, hang out there for a little bit. And Romeo says to Friar Lawrence, you basically says, you can't speak about what you've never felt. He says, if you were like me, an hour but married, Tybalt murdered, you be yourself being banished, then you can give me advice. Then you could tell me about this. But because you've never done any of these things, you don't know what it's like, Friar Lawrence.
He's like wrong.
And Friar Lawrence is like, I do know what it's like. You know, Friar Lawrence can be like, I may not have experienced this, but I'm a man. I'm a human being. I also have emotions, and I can tell you that you're being an idiot. And Romeo says, but you haven't experienced this so precisely and acutely that you actually don't know what it's like to have this, the feelings that I have, which is a very like 19-year-old person thing to say.
I'm feeling it stronger than you ever have.
You ever have.
That's right. Exactly.
But the thing is, okay, maybe that's a comical, and in that sense, like Friar Lawrence is clearly in the right on this. But that is kind of illustrating a little bit of this problem, which is there are benefits and limitations from being purely a first principles thinker. Friar Lawrence, who lives alone in a cell but has a lot of knowledge about things. And there are benefits but limitations of being somebody who experiences a lot and sort of goes off into the world. And my question is like, how can I phrase this? There are times when you need to be one, and there's times when you need to be the other.
Sure.
And it's hard to know when those times are. So without driving too much of a wedge between Plato and Aristotle, one way you can think of Aristotle is that Aristotle is the kind of thinking that would put a lot of sort of weight behind statistics, a bell curve.
Right.
Because that is the bell curve is like the experience of the world. So here's all of these scenarios that play out, and here's the distribution of the outcomes. And because of the distribution of the outcomes, we can look at the fat middle of that bell curve, and we can make sort of predictive results about the world. Yep. That is the Aristotelian kind of ethos. That is the hand pointing down. And there's a lot of times when that is really, really, really helpful. And that kind of thinking is great and carries a lot of water, and you can be very successful in the world doing that. But then there are other times where you need to sort of like have an idea and try to have like, and then work to have, the context conform to that idea. All right, there's a big football game today. UT is playing Georgia, right? Let's use a sports analogy. There's two ways to build a team to succeed in a game, right? Mm-hmm. One is you're like Plato, and you have a philosophy, an idea about how the way the game is to be played. The game should be played like this. You should have players. I can sit by myself and I can play the game in my mind about how or I could write it on a piece of paper in a coffee shop of how the game should be played. And then I can go.
I've seen this episode of Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Season 3.
And then I can go and I can tell my players to conform to my realm of ideas, my finger pointing up.
Yep.
And we're going to win playing that way. Then there's the Aristotelian way of playing it. You look at the team you have in front of you and you say, all right, I've got AJ and he's tall, and I've got Magby and he's strong, and I'm going to have Magby kick the ball as hard as he can to AJ, who's going to head it in the goal because AJ's taller than everybody else.
Are we talking about football?
We're talking
still?
about soccer.
Okay.
We switched. Yeah.
We did.
sorry,
We were
we
just
switched.
talking
We started
UT,
with-
and
Oh,
then
you're
now
right.
people are
Yeah,
heading
yeah.
things into goals, and I was like,
I don't think that's how.
it's about right for a classical podcast.
It's really good.
Do you play football with your feet? There's a little kicking.
Okay.
Have you seen that sketch, the SNL sketch?
No.
Oh, okay, never mind. All right. Sorry. So there's different ways. Okay, we can go back to American football. So
But they're both good, right? Like
they can both win games.
Sure, right. And I think this is AJ's point about the teacher with 20 years experience. Both are trying to get to winning the game, right?
Yeah.
The end is the same, and you'll need both, right? You'll need some theory. You'll need some. What's your team look like?
I guess so. My question is one more fragile than another? Is it more dangerous to be the pig-headed Platonist who says, I'm going to play there's a right way to play the game regardless of whether or not I have the players to play that kind of game? Or is it more dangerous to be the eternal pragmatist that is just looking at bell curve statistics and isn't paying attention to the wings and getting blown out every now and then because you're like, well, those risky events on the tail ends of curves only happen like 1% of the time, so I'm not even going to worry about them. I guess is it better to be one or the other? Or do you have to be a Platonist and an Aristotelian at different points in something?
Let's use another sports analogy. You fellas ever seen the movie Moneyball?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
That's
This is a
what-
perfect
that's what
example.
you're thinking. Go
So
for it. Yeah.
Moneyball, I think, begins with the Platonist view. He says, I have a theory about how this is going to go, right? We need to look at the stats, which would be kind of it's sort of a combination. He's like, this is how we're going to put the team together. A team wins when the guys get on base. Doesn't matter what else they're doing. As long as we can get on base, the guys are going to win.
Even if they do it on aggregate.
Yeah, even if they do it like on aggregate, if it's by getting walked, I don't care if they hit or get walked. If he gets walked 5 times out of 6 when he's at bat, I don't care. He's on
Yes.
base, right? So they go out and they find players that are undervalued because they have high get on base statistics, right? So there's his principle, his essence. Teams win when they get on base, right? That's the Plato.
Perfect.
The Aristotle comes in when they take those individual players and he gets into a conflict with his coach, or like his manager, whatever it is. He's the general manager. I forget what.
I think.
Anyway.
There's that scene with the scout. I'll let you finish your
Well,
point.
the scouts
but
will disagree.
Yeah.
right?
So the scouts all disagree, and the guy who's actually putting people in the game is still trying to run it like an old baseball
Yes.
team. And so the team is not functioning because that principle isn't being put into practice. And so
the old coach with experience.
the old coach with experience is like, this isn't really doing it, and I'm going to get laughed out of here when we lose a whole bunch of games. And they continue to lose because he simply won't put the Platonic ideal into practice.
Yes.
Once they do put it into practice, you still have to work with the team. There's still a guy that needs a little more confidence. They still got to teach him on pitching. And so you sort of see the Aristotelian come back when they are dealing with individual guys.
Yeah.
So they have this idea, they put it into practice, and then after they get rid of this joker who won't actually put the principle into practice, those guys who have those years of experience still have to work with the ball players and like make them, like there's one guy who doesn't know how to play first base, and they help him understand how to play first base because, yep, he can get on base.
Because you need Giambi because he gets walked all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he gets walked all the time, but they need him to be able to actually play a first baseman, and so they have to take some time and teach him. So they need a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And I think the Aristotelian comes into practice as they're choosing players because it's not just that they get on base. They look at a realm of statistics, right?
Yeah. Now, what I think is really interesting is you get these back and forth. So let's say, for example, that the Moneyball came into baseball at a time when people were more Aristotelian, that they had like the way of playing, and everybody kind of got locked into this way of playing through the sort of, well, maybe this isn't going to work. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, do you swing to be more of this like idealist when everybody else is playing bell curves, and do you swing more to be bell curves when everybody else is being an idealist? Like, someone comes in with this new way of playing the game that is based on a philosophy that he's concocted in his mind, and then he tries to conform reality to his idea, and he's successful. Yeah. But then when everybody starts doing that, everybody sort of has analytics teams that are putting together to try to play the game in a different way. You're going to have somebody that's going to have to innovate. And does it swing over to the other side? Do you sort of innovate back to, going back to basics or going back to pragmatism, or are you sort of swing back to this more Aristotelian way of thinking about solutions?
I think maybe we are underselling what Aristotle is actually trying to do. I think we're trying to say, like, he's like, just be practical, figure out the knowledge that way. But I think what Aristotle is saying is the opposite of what Plato said. Plato said, can't trust your eyeballs, right? They're never going to tell you the truth. You have to do it just with pure mind.
Yeah.
And what Aristotle is saying is like, no, your eyeballs are telling you real information. And the way you get to the essence is by bringing together a whole bunch of memories and a whole load of experience and then putting an idea together. And so going back to the Moneyball analogy, the guy who concocted this plan ran across a statistician and said, like, I like what you were saying in there. And from experience, he recognized, now this is a guy that knows what he's talking about. Teams win when they get on base. And he knew that because of years and years and years of experience and an aggregate of memories that he had with different baseball teams. And so I think it's unfair to say it's just lock in, do the bell curve.
Yeah, no, you're right.
That guy knew the essence. He did. Right? Plato knows the essence because he wants to skip the eyeball part.
Yeah.
Aristotle says, no, you still need to know the essence. That is the art. You both get to the same principle, but you're only going to do it by like trusting your eyeballs. I think it's more an epistemological position, like this is how we earn knowledge, than a statement about like pragmatism versus theory.
Aristotle, I think when he gives that analogy about doctors have to cure individual men, they don't cure man, really gets to it, because when you come to when you come to being an artist, when you get to the idea of something through experience, there's all of these other factors at play, like muscle memory, the fact that you are, you even if you do something with experience, you also develop an intuition for something that you sometimes can't quite put your fingers on. And you kind of have that like embodied experience that comes to a knowledge. And then when you have theoretical knowledge mixed with embodied experience, you're probably better than just the theoretical knowledge. Which is what he got at.
Yeah, for one of my favorite like teacher theoretical like experience things that I put into place is you need your kids to believe that you've got eyes in the back of your head. So the way that I do this is I have a rule for no gum in my classroom. So if I see a kid is chewing gum, I don't call him out yet. I wait for a few minutes. And when I'm turned around, writing notes on the board, and I'm like 2 sentences in and I haven't looked at them in 20 minutes, I say, Jeff, go spit out your gum. And they're like, how do you even see me? And so then they believe that I see all.
It's like the noble lie, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's like one of those things that they don't really teach you in the theory, but...
So another way that we can sort of think about this, and this is going to continue on with the sports analogy, is... there is a ethos of playing soccer in South America that is different than how you play it in Europe. In Europe, they are much more, they have this idea of a philosophy. You have the manager, and the manager has an idea of how the game is going to be played, and he is going to conform his team into playing according to his ideals. That's a very European way of doing it. The best coach in the world, Pep Guardiola, has an idea of how the game is played in his mind, and he has his players conform to that idea. Players and coaches in South America, one of the most a very influential coach in South America. He was the coach of the Brazilian national team for a while, and he coaches a team named Fluminense in Brazil. Fernando Diniz. He's got this way of coaching where it's like, I don't tell the players how to play. I have the players sort of figure out, they need to be in a relationship with each other as players and solve the problems of the game through their sort of intuition of where each other are on the pitch. The European model is, maybe I'm going to tell you that if AJ does this with the ball, you're going to do this, and you memorize that. And every time he does that, we're going to drill it. You're going to move here when AJ does this. So in the game, when it happens, we're a machine. Whereas in the South American version, it's like, I need you and AJ to become buddies, have some beers together, get each other's sort of vibes, and kind of know each other, so that when you're on the field, you kind of like intuit what's going to happen, and you play it in this relational way as opposed into this prescribed way. I think Aristotle is more lends itself to that second way, which is through lots and lots of repetitive experience of the world, you not only get an intellectual theory of how things work, but you also get a I don't want to say vibe, but I'm going to. You get like sort of a vibe of how nature works, about how things work. Like you can get a feel that when this person is sick in this way, like maybe my theory isn't going to be perfect because there's all these other variables that I've experienced before. And I know that, well, in this case, actually, I think my rubbing the dirt technique isn't going to be as effective because of all these other variables that aren't necessarily part of the theory, but they are part of the experience. And so you can sort of then like come to the solution. You can be successful in whatever realm you're doing because you've sort of built up that experience of doing something.
Yeah, you know that rubbing the dirt might not fix his runny nose, but it sure will make him beautiful.
Yes, and his skin is going to be exfoliated.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no lie. I am much more of a fan of Aristotle than I am of Plato. I think Plato is a little naive in saying the world is a lie and you have to jump over it to get to truth. And I think Aristotle is much more correct when he says, he's much more forgiving, where he's like, we can come to statements about what is, but he also says, we're going to leave room for mistakes. Like, there's going to be mistakes. Like, you need to cure Callias. You need to cure Socrates. You can't cure mankind. There's always going to be all of you. We can't control all of the variables. Plato wants to know the form and control. Aristotle gives room for, not pure pragmatism, but he gives more room for he sort of gives intellectual wiggle room.
So, for example, Plato, when in his Republic, gives the form of the perfect city. Mm-hmm. And so Aristotle would go in and say, well, sure, that's all great in theory, but what if these people are like a seafaring people and they live on the seashore? Yeah. That's going to be a little bit different. What if their warfare isn't necessarily on the ground, but really all about sailing? That's going to look different. And what if they're people of letters or people of philosophy versus mostly a farming people, right? Like different kinds of nations do different kinds of things. A mountain people is going to look different, right? So maybe but if you have experience of all those, if you know what a seafaring people looks like and a mountain people, and you've lived in all of these places, and then you have to go start a city in a desert, well, you've got the art. Mm-hmm. You know how to deal with different kinds of people. You still know the principle, what a perfect place is supposed to look like, but really you're concerned with this individual city, the one built near a desert oasis, and you're not going to be sailing. I mean, more like a mountain, more like a plains type of people. And so you have all that art. You still know the principle, but you don't just try to skip the experience, which is governing in all of those different places.
In his Politics, Aristotle says, here's how monarchy works, here's how monarchy falls apart. Here's how a republic works, here's how the republic falls apart. Whereas Plato, in his version of the Politics, which is Republic, says, here is how a city, the best city, should function. And we're all going to be married. We've done a whole episode, 10 episodes on it. It was like, we're all going to marry each other, and like we're going to lie to the ugly people so they have no kids. And
we're going to have a weird sex lottery and tell the army that they have golden blood. And I think Aristotle's like, none of this works, right?
But that's sort of indicative of the problem, is that like the more Platonist thinker can get so married to the theory that you can be so divorced from reality that you end up being absurd. Whereas, is there a way? I'm trying to think of like, how can Aristotle go wrong? I mean, Aristotle can go wrong, but there is a danger.
It's getting entrenched in a small sample size.
Yeah, that's probably
the problem with Aristotle is he prescribes a large set of experiences to develop the art, right? To get to the principle through your eyeballs over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. Well, you can say you've been all over Italy and you know the Italian temperament, you know all sorts of different people, and you end up making claims about man. And then when you travel to France and they're like, man is not like that, you're like, yes, he is. I've been all over Italy, right?
That's right. You can be limited by the sample size that
Yeah,
you have.
sample size is the danger
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
You
Anyway.
might pick up things that are unrelated, like that. And I know we keep using the dirt example, but I have successfully healed this many people of this ailment. I have used dirt every single time. Therefore, that's the correct way to heal it every time going forward, as opposed to can I come to some theory of some germ theory that's like what's actually causing whatever disease that I'm treating.
Yeah.
Or accidentally prescribing the wrong causes. So you've been rubbing dirt all the time, but before you rub the dirt, you put an ointment on their face so the dirt sticks. But really, it's the ointment that's doing the curing.
True.
My favorite example of this is there was a tribe in South America that their main diet was a specific root vegetable, and they had this really complicated way of preparing it. They like soaked it for like days, and then they like beat the crap out of it, and they would dry it, and then they would cook it, and then they would eat it. But if you just cooked it and ate it without doing all of that, it made no taste difference whatsoever. It tasted exactly the same. All right. So the South American tribe had this like, they didn't tell you why when asked why you do this, they would say like, they gave some sort of religious reason for it. And so it was one of these situations where, so this happened this was an ancient way of preparing this food in South America with this root. This root could also grow in certain climates in the global south. So it was imported over to Africa because it was an easy to grow root, and they thought maybe it could help with some food scarcity problems over there. And they had the local tribes in Africa grow this root and prepare it and eat it, but they left out all that religious nonsense of like about straining it and drying it and all that kind of stuff. And they just gave it to the I think the colonial powers had like a colony in South America and brought it to their colony in Africa, something like that. But they didn't teach the people that they gave the root to about all this preparation. Well, turns out that it was not detectable in a short period of time, but over like a generation, cyanide poisoning skyrocketed in this African tribe. And it was because turns out that ancient way of preparing the food actually leached out this like small trace samples of cyanide that when you didn't do that would build up in your system, and then you would die of cyanide poisoning after eating this for like 25 years. Yeah. And the tribe in South America didn't know it in theory, but they had sort of a religious sort of reason behind it. And when they asked, well, what happened if you don't do it? Well, it's just a bad taboo thing to do. You need to do this. But in reality, it had a real reason for it, but they didn't know, they didn't have the language, or they didn't have the theory to talk about cyanide. They didn't know the biology of the human, of cyanide poisoning.
They just knew that people who don't cook it properly die.
But they knew that the families that do it in a different way, the gods get them in the end, right? And they died early, and so we should prepare our food in this way. And it turned out that you actually had this, in that sense, like the experience, in that sense, almost like the superstition saved them. But the superstition was acting as the theory when you didn't have the scientific theory behind it, but you did have the benefits of the spiritual theory behind it. And so I think about that example a lot when it comes to people that. So this is sort of like the. Not having enough sample size, or just jumping to conclusions about what is causing what, and then rolling out a program and not really knowing why you're doing it, and then you can actually create a hazard and not realizing that hazard.
Right.
So you have a theory about a new way to teach kids how to read. And so then you develop this huge program of how to teach kids how to read. And then in 20 years, the data comes out that actually this doesn't work, and kids don't know how to read. Yeah. And now you have a generation of kids that are like screwed because you didn't teach them phonics. You taught them total language, or whatever that thing was called in the 90s.
Or the other fun one is the self-esteem movement.
Yeah.
Right, which they're like, it'll make people feel better, and they'll be more, but just made a whole bunch of jerkwads that thought they were awesome and didn't actually try it anything.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all. We'll sort of wrap it up there. That's so. Whenever if you ever see the School of Athens and you see Plato pointing up and you see Aristotle pointing down, just you can sort of know that both of those kinds of things are needed in order to cultivate wisdom. There are times when you need to kind of like not trust your eyes and stick to the plan in your mind that you have in your mind. And there are times when you need to gather advice and get statistics, or you need to do it the proper way. You need to have embodied experience before you can be considered wise at something. And so that's what we have. That's what we talk about today.
There you go. Well, this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. And all those words that Graham said before we started recording now make a whole lot more sense.
Oh, he didn't talk about literature. Well, maybe we do that in the in-between.
He added a whole bunch of other extra words that didn't necessarily make it onto the main episode. So if you're looking for the side stuff, you can go support us on Patreon, which is patreon.com/classical stuff. Isn't that right?
Yep.
So you can find us there and hear our in-between banter where we talk between the episodes. You can also hear our monthly AMAs. You can also find us online at classicalstuff.net. That's our website. And you can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. And we're also on Twitter with CLSSCAL stuff. And I think that's it. We're not on anything else. Not on like Blue Sky or
Mastodon, is that still a thing?
or like TikTok.
Yep.
Mastodon? What's Mastodon?
Another Twitter clone, right?
I'm on TikTok. I do a lot of dancing.
You
Wow.
you TikTok it?
Search for Graham the Investor on TikTok. Good, thanks.
Anyway, we're doing stuff. So thanks for listening.
All right. Ciao.
Bye.